She threw the champagne directly into Imani's face. Not accidentally. Not in a drunken stumble. She looked her in the eyes, raised the crystal flute, and poured crimson wine down the front of a woman who had done nothing. Nothing except exist in the same room. The ballroom went silent, the way rooms only go silent when something has gone terribly, irreversibly wrong. Cross stood there, champagne dripping from her lashes, soaking into the collar of her uniform, in front of 200 people who could have stopped it and chose to watch instead. And then Sabine Laurent reached for a second glass. If you had been standing in that ballroom, if that had been you standing there, what would you have done? Before we go further, if stories about dignity, betrayal, and the moment one person's quiet courage dismantles an entire empire are what you come here for, make sure you are subscribed to this channel right now. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a story like this one. Drop a like and tell me in the comments what city or country you are watching from tonight. I genuinely want to know how far this story has traveled. Now let's go back to where everything began. The night Imani Cross almost lost, everything started the same way most catastrophic nights do, quietly, and with good shoes. She had spent 40 minutes that afternoon, making sure her black flats were clean enough to pass Malachi Viscari's standards. Not because he had ever said anything about her shoes. He hadn't. Malachi Viscari didn't micromanage. He didn't need to. The man had a way of looking at a room that told every person in it exactly what was expected, without a single word being spoken. 6 years of working in his household had taught Imani to read that silence the way other people read weather. You learned the patterns, or you got caught in the storm. She had ironed her uniform twice. The second time wasn't necessary. She knew that. But her hands needed something to do, and ironing was better than sitting in her small room off the east corridor, thinking about how much she hated engagement parties. She didn't hate them because she was bitter. That's the easy version of the story, and Imani Cross had never been interested in the easy version of anything. She hated engagement parties because they required a particular kind of performance, from her cheerful, invisible, available, and tonight of all nights, with the chandeliers blazing and the champagne flowing, and Sabine Laurent floating through the crowd in a gown that cost more than Imani made in 8 months. That performance felt like wearing a costume that was 3 sizes too small. She had nothing against love. She had plenty against the way some people celebrated it. The Viscari mansion on the North Shore of Chicago was not a subtle building. It never had been. 3 stories of limestone and steel, surrounded by manicured grounds and a security perimeter that the official story described as standard precautions for a man of significant business interests. Anyone who had lived in Chicago long enough knew what those significant business interests actually were. You didn't ask. You understood. And if you were smart, you were grateful that the man on the other side of those precautions was someone who kept his word and, on most days, kept his violence invisible. Imani was smart. She had always been smart, which was partly why her situation frustrated her in ways she rarely let herself examine too closely. She had been 26 when she first applied to work in the Viscari household. She had been 3 semesters into a hospitality degree at DePaul, carrying a part-time job waiting tables and sending money home to her mother in Bronzeville, when her mother's diagnosis arrived like a truck through a window. MS progressive. The kind of diagnosis that didn't come with a plan, only a list of expenses. Imani had withdrawn from school the following Monday. She had told herself it was temporary. People told themselves that a lot. The job in the Viscari household had come through a woman named Dolores Reyes, who had worked for the family for 20 years, and who had a way of finding capable people the way a compass finds north, without effort, without error. Dolores had spotted Imani refilling water glasses at a corporate dinner event and had handed her a card the way a person hands someone a lifeline casually, so the recipient doesn't feel the weight of it until later. The pay was excellent. The expectations were serious. And Malachi Viscari, for all the stories that circulated about him in certain corners of the city, had never once treated Imani as anything other than a professional doing professional work. That was its own kind of rarity, and she had learned not to take it for granted. She has also learned, over 6 years, to read the rooms of that mansion the way she read everything else carefully, completely, and with a memory for detail that most people didn't realize she possessed. She remembered which captains arrived with muddy boots and which ones were always too clean. She remembered which deliveries came on rotating schedules and which ones came in patterns that didn't match any invoice she had ever been handed. She remembered faces, voices, the particular way certain men paused before they lied. She remembered everything. It was a habit she had developed young, and it had served her in ways she could not yet entirely see. But on the night of the engagement party, she wasn't thinking about any of that. She was carrying a tray of champagne flutes through the east corridor toward the main ballroom, listening to the orchestra play, something that probably cost more per hour than she made per week. And she was thinking about a small lakeside property she had seen listed online 3 months ago. It had a wraparound porch. It had 11 rooms. It sat at the edge of Lake Geneva, and the listing description had said, with the particular optimism of someone who needed to sell, full of potential. She had looked at it for 20 minutes on her phone and then closed the browser and gone back to work. But the image had a way of returning to her at inconvenient moments. The porch, the water, the 11 rooms that could become something. Cross Harbor House, she had thought once, before she could stop herself. Then she had felt foolish for naming something she didn't own, and she had gone back to her inventory spreadsheets. She pushed through the service door into the ballroom and did not immediately notice Sabine Laurent watching her. She noticed Malachi first, which was not unusual. Malachi Vescari had a gravitational quality that made rooms reorganize themselves around him without his permission. He was standing near the grand staircase, speaking with a man Imani recognized as a state senator, and he was doing the thing he always did. When he was tolerating someone, he was listening with complete attention while thinking about something entirely different. You could see it if you knew where to look. His eyes were polite and his mind was elsewhere. He glanced up as Imani moved through the room. Not a long glance. Not a meaningful glance by any ordinary reading. He simply looked up the way people look up when something familiar moves through their peripheral vision, the way you might glance toward a window when the light shifts. Then he said something that made the senator laugh, and the moment passed. Imani distributed 3 glasses and turned back toward the service corridor. She almost made it. You. The word landed like a finger tapping on glass. Imani turned. Sabine Laurent was standing 6 feet away, with a champagne flute in one hand and an expression that Imani recognized from the very first day she had met her 8 months ago, when Malachi had first brought her to the mansion and introduced her to the household stuff the way someone introduces luggage to a hotel porter. Acknowledgement without warmth. Assessment without interest. Sabine was beautiful in the way that certain buildings are beautiful, all facade, all precision, nothing inviting about the structure once you got close enough to see the details. She was from old money on her mother's side, and newer, more complicated money on her father's. She wore the gown the way someone wears armor. She had never, not once in 8 months, called Imani by her name. "Is there a problem with the Moet?" Sabine asked, and her eyes traveled slowly down Imani's uniform and back up in a way that was not about the champagne. "No, ma'am," Imani said. "Everything is going smoothly." "Then why?" Sabine said, lowering her voice to a register that was somehow worse than a shout. "Were you standing near the staircase talking to my fiancé?" Imani kept her expression neutral, the way she had learned to keep her expression in trial, by focusing on a fixed point just past the person's left ear and breathing through her nose. Mr. Vescari asked whether the catering team needed anything from the kitchen. I told him everything was in order. That's a very detailed answer for a very simple question. Sabine tilted her head. "Do you always require that much conversation to confirm that the kitchen is running properly?" he asked. Sabine smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of someone who has decided to make an example of something and is taking a moment to enjoy the preparation. "I've watched you for 8 months, she said conversationally, as if she were discussing something pleasant. "The way you move through this house, the way you make yourself useful. Do you think I haven't noticed?" Imani said nothing. She had learned very early that silence was the one thing people like Sabine Laurent couldn't productively weaponize. It turned out she was wrong. "You're in love with him," Sabine said, loud enough now that the couple nearest to them shifted slightly. "Aren't you? That's what this is. That's not—" "Don't." Sabine's voice dropped again, but the smile stayed. "Don't embarrass yourself further. You're a big girl, Imani, in every sense of the phrase. I understand the fantasy. Truly. Working in a house like this, serving a man like that, it must be very... She paused, selecting the word with care. Stimulating. The room around them was not yet fully paying attention. Not yet. But Imani could feel the subtle shift the way two conversations nearby had softened, the way a woman in a silver dress had half turned. I'm going to return to my duties, Imani said, and she meant it. She turned. Sabine stepped in front of her, not grabbing, not touching, just standing there, blocking the path, with the particular confidence of someone who had never once in her life been told that she could not do what she was doing. I'm not finished, Sabine said. I want you to understand something, since apparently 6 years in this household hasn't made it clear enough. You are the help. You will always be the help. And whatever warmth you imagine you have cultivated with Malachi, I promise you, it does not mean what you have decided it means in whatever small life you live when you leave this building. Imani looked at her, not through her, not past her, at her, directly. I have never once, Imani said quietly, behaved with anything other than professionalism in this house. And I would appreciate it if you spoke to me with the same basic respect you'd offer anyone else in this room. It was the wrong thing to say, not because it was wrong, because it was right. And Sabine Laurent was not a woman who responded well to being correctly answered. The smile disappeared. Basic respect, Sabine repeated. You want basic respect. She laughed, and it was an awful sound, not loud, not cruel in any theatrical way, but small and dismissive, the sound of something being crushed without effort. Do you know what you look like in that uniform, standing in this room? Do you have any idea what these people see when they look at you? Sabine. A man nearby, one of Malachi's associates, Imani thought his name was Ferrante, said her name quietly. A warning, possibly. Or possibly just discomfort. Sabine ignored him. Let me save you some dignity, she said to Imani. Quietly resign. Take a good reference letter and find somewhere more appropriate for your ambitions. Because I am going to be Mrs. Vescari, and I will not spend the next 30 years watching the hired help make eyes at my husband. Imani's heart was hammering, not from fear. She recognized this particular hammering. It was the one that showed up when she was angry in a way that had nowhere to go, when the dignified response and the human response were fighting each other for control of her voice. She chose dignified. She always chose dignified. It cost her something every time. I have no intentions toward Mr. Vescari, beyond doing my job well, Imani said, and her voice was steady. And I will not be resigning. Sabine stared at her for a long moment. Then she grabbed Imani's wrist, not a gentle grip. The fingers closed around the bone with intent, and Imani felt the shock of it travel up her arm before her brain had time to process what was happening. Her tray tilted. One glass hit the floor and shattered. Several more people turned at the sound, and now the nearby conversations had gone completely quiet. Let go of me, Imani said. The steadiness in her voice surprised even her. Sabine did not let go. She raised her champagne flute with her free hand, the one that wasn't holding Imani's wrist, and she looked at Imani with an expression that had moved completely beyond anger into something colder and more deliberate, and she poured it. The crimson champagne hit Imani in the face, soaked her collar, dripped from her chin onto her uniform, onto the floor, onto the shards of the broken glass. It was cold. It smelled sharp and sweet at the same time. And the room, the entire ballroom, with its orchestra that had just noticed and stopped, with its 200 guests who had all, in the span of 4 seconds, turned to look, went absolutely silent. Imani stood perfectly still. She did not raise her hands. She did not step back. She stood in the wreckage of the moment, champagne on her face, broken glass at her feet, her wrist still in Sabine's grip, and she looked at the woman in front of her with an expression that would stay in the memory of everyone who saw it for a very long time. Not tears, not rage, something quieter than both, and somehow harder to look at. Sabine, perhaps mistaking stillness for submission, reached for a second glass from a nearby table. She raised it, and Malachi Vescari appeared at her shoulder. He had not run. He had not pushed through the crowd. He was simply suddenly there, the way powerful men are suddenly there, when they have decided the distance between themselves and a situation is no longer acceptable. His expression was not angry. It was something that people who had done business with Malachi Vescari at any level recognized immediately and responded to with a physical instinct older than thought. The second glass did not move. Sabine felt his presence before she turned. You could see it happen, the slight stiffening of her spine, the almost imperceptible change in the way she was holding herself. She turned. And Malachi Vescari, the man whose name appeared on the lips of judges and captains and federal agents in the same tone of careful deliberation, looked at the woman he intended to marry. Then he looked at Imani. Then he looked at the champagne still dripping from Imani's chin. Then he looked back at Sabine. And the most feared man in Chicago said, very quietly, so that the people nearest to them had to strain to hear it, "Put the glass down." It was not a request. Sabine put the glass down. "Step away from her," he said. And Sabine, who had spent the last 8 months moving through this house as if she owned it, already stepped away. Malachi moved to stand beside Imani, not in front of her, beside her. And then, before the ballroom full of politicians and businessmen and criminal captains who had watched the most powerful man in their world be publicly embarrassed at his own engagement party, Malachi Vesk crouched down. He crouched down, on one knee, on the marble floor, amid the broken glass and the spilled champagne, and he picked up the one unbroken flute that had rolled to the edge of the mess. He set it carefully on a nearby table. Then he straightened and looked at Imani, not past her, not over her head at the crowd, not with the expression of a man calculating how to manage a situation. He looked at her the way a person looks at another person when they are trying to determine if they are all right. "Are you hurt?" he said. Imani's jaw was tight. She would not let it tremble. "I'm fine." He looked at her wrist, the one Sabine had been holding. There was a redness there already. He said nothing about it then, but he looked at it, and he remembered. He turned to face the ballroom. 200 people were staring at him. He looked at them with that particular stillness of his, the kind that didn't need volume, and he said, "The evening's is over." It was not the announcement anyone had expected. Several people began to speak at once, a cluster of men near the bar, one of the event coordinators, Ferrante, who had moved closer and was saying something in a low voice that Malachi was not listening to. "Malachi." Sabine stepped forward. Her voice had recovered its composure, mostly. There was something underneath it, though something that sounded less like anger now and more like the first awareness that she had misread the room very badly. "This is our engagement party. You can't simply, I just did." He turned to look at her. "You'll be taken home. We'll speak tomorrow." "She is a maid," Sabine said, and her voice carried the particular desperation of someone reaching for an argument they believe must be irrefutable. "She works here." "This is Malachi. You cannot possibly be. I can see your wrist from here," he said to Imani, not loudly, almost private. Imani looked at her own wrist. The red marks were more defined now. Nothing broken, something bruised. Sabine saw where he was looking. She provoked. "Ferrante," Malachi said. Ferrante, a man who had survived 30 years in very difficult circles by being exceptionally good at reading the room, appeared at Sabine's elbow immediately. "I'll arrange the car. I'm not leaving." Sabine's voice was quiet now, finally, and the quietness was worse in its own way. "Malachi, think about what you're doing." He had already thought about it. That was the thing Imani understood, watching his face, that she did not think most people in the room understood. He had not made this decision in the last 60 seconds. He had been deciding something for longer than that, and what had happened tonight had simply made the decision visible. "Go home, Sabine," he said. She went. The ballroom began to empty in the strange shuffling way. Ballrooms empty when the reason for being there has definitively ended. People collected their coats and spoke in low voices, and carefully did not make eye contact with anyone who might require them to have an opinion about what they'd witnessed. Imani stood in the center of the marble floor and thought, "I should go change. I should go clean up. I should not be standing here." She stood there anyway. Malachi came back to where she was standing, after he had spoken briefly to 3 different men and made 2 phone calls he apparently could not delay. He stood beside her and looked out at the emptying room. "You've been working here 6 years, he said. "It wasn't a question." "Yes, and she's been behaving like that. With you. With others." Imani was quiet for a moment. She had spent 6 years choosing her words carefully in this house. Old habits were hard to break in a single evening, even an evening like this one. "She was difficult," Imani said, finally. He turned and looked at her. "That's not what I asked." Imani looked back at him. The champagne was drying on her collar. The marble was cold through her shoes. 200 people had just watched her be publicly humiliated, and now the man who ran this house was looking at her, with an expression she could not entirely read. "Yes," she said. "She has been behaving like that, with me and with others." For months, he nodded once, slowly, and Imani, watching his face in the sudden silence of a ballroom that had been full of music and laughter 40 minutes earlier, had the particular uncomfortable feeling of a woman standing at the edge of a change she had not asked for and could not yet see the shape of. She looked down at her wrist. She looked up at the empty staircase where Sabine had descended 2 hours ago in her perfect gown. She thought involuntarily, Cross Harbor House, 11 rooms, a wraparound porch, full of potential. Then she thought, stop it. Then she thought, but what if you don't? And she was still thinking about that, still standing in the wreckage of someone else's engagement party with champagne drying in her hair, when Malachi Vescari said something she had not expected. "I'm sorry this happened in my house." She looked at him. "That's not your apology to make," she said carefully. "No," he agreed, "but I'm making it anyway." Outside, through the tall windows, the city lights of Chicago reflected off the surface of the lake. The chandeliers above them were still blazing. The orchestra's sheet music had been on the stands in the rush of departure, and the pages were moving slightly in the breeze from the open doors. Somewhere in the east corridor, Imani could hear two of the catering staff talking in low, stunned voices. She could hear the name Sabine. She could hear her own name. And she could hear, below both of those, the particular silence of a night that had broken in a direction no one had predicted, least of all the woman standing in a champagne-soaked uniform in the middle of a ballroom, holding her bruised wrist against her side, trying very hard not to feel the thing she was beginning to feel. She was not in love with Malachi Vescari. She had never let herself go anywhere near that idea. But standing there, in the rubble of the evening, she was beginning to understand that the next chapter of her life, whatever it looked like, was going to be something she had not planned for. And Imani Cross, who had survived everything that had come before by being prepared, by being careful, by keeping her copies of things that didn't add up, and her memory for faces, and her disciplines about what she herself to want as someone, Imani Cross was not prepared. Not for any of this. Not yet. The mansion was quiet by midnight, but it wasn't the kind of quiet that meant peace. It was the kind of quiet that meant everyone was still awake, in separate rooms, thinking very hard. Imani had changed out of the champagne-soaked uniform in the small bathroom off the staff corridor. She had washed her face twice. The second time, she stood over the sink and looked at herself in the mirror. For a long moment, the dark circles under her eyes that had been there for months, the faint mark on her wrist where Sabine's fingers had been, the expression of a woman who was trying to decide which version of herself she was going to be for the rest of this night. She chose the version that put one foot in front of the other. She went back to the kitchen to help finish the cleanup, because that was her job, and because standing still would have given her too much room to feel things she wasn't ready to feel yet. Rosa was already there. Rosa Mendez, 24 years old, who had been working in the mansion for 11 months, and who had, over those 11 months, learned to make herself very small whenever Sabine Laurent was in the building. She was loading champagne flutes into the dishwasher rack with the careful focus of someone forming médecin requires no thought, which meant her mind was somewhere else entirely. She looked up when Imani came in. She looked back down. Then she said, without looking up again, "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," Imani said. The same thing she had told Malachi. The answer that wasn't quite a lie and wasn't quite the truth. Rosa nodded. She slid another glass into the rack. "I saw the whole thing. Most people did. I should have." Rosa stopped. Started again. "I wanted to say something." She stopped again, and this time she put a glass down on the counter and pressed both hands flat against the edge of the sink. "I didn't. I just stood there, and I'm sorry." Imani looked at her, at the tension in her shoulders, the way she was staring at the counter instead of at Imani. "How long has she been doing it?" Imani asked, not accusing, just asking. Rosa was quiet long enough that the dishwasher's hum filled the silence. "Since the 3rd month," she finally said, "when Mr. Vescari went to Milan for 2 weeks. She came by every day. It wasn't always like tonight. Sometimes it was just comments. The way she looked at you when you brought something wrong or when you moved too slowly. But sometimes she shook her head. Daniel quit in February. You remember? He told everyone it was because of a family thing in Guadalajara. I remember, Imani said slowly. It wasn't a family thing, Rosa said. Imani leaned against the counter and let that settle. Daniel had been one of the best household managers she had ever worked alongside. Methodical, quiet, good with vendors. He had given 2 weeks' notice and been gone before she had a chance to ask him anything real. Who else? Imani said. Rosa listed 4 names, 4 people, over 8 months, who had left or been pushed out or gone quiet, in ways Imani had noticed but attributed to the ordinary turnover of household work. 4 people who had not said anything, because there was nothing to be gained from saying anything, because Sabine Laurent was going to be Mrs. Vescari and Mrs. Vescari's word would outweigh anything a housekeeper or a driver or a kitchen assistant might say. That was the calculation. Imani understood it in her bones. She had made versions of it herself, for 6 years. Why are you telling me now? Imani asked. Rosa finally looked at her. Because he knelt down, she said, on the floor, in front of everyone, and he asked if you were hurt. She paused. I've worked here 11 months. I've never seen him do anything like that for anyone. Imani said nothing. I think things are different now, Rosa said. I think I don't know what I think. But I'm not going to keep quiet anymore about things I know. Imani nodded. She picked up a clean dish towel and began drying the glasses Rosa had already washed. They worked in silence for 20 minutes, and the silence was not uncomfortable, which was its own thing, the particular ease between people who have understood something together. At midnight, Malachi appeared in the kitchen doorway. He was still in his suit, but the jacket was gone, and the tie was loosened, and he had the look of a man who had spent the last 2 hours on the phone having conversations he had not enjoyed. There was a stillness in the way he stood that Imani had learned to read as controlled exhaustion, not tired in the body, tired in the way that came from managing the weight of things that didn't resolve cleanly. He looked at Rosa first. Go home, he said, not unkindly. You're done for the night. Rosa looked at Imani. Go, Imani said. Rosa untied her apron, collected her bag from the hook near the service door, and was gone with the quiet efficiency of someone who understood when they were being given a gift. Malachi came into the kitchen and poured himself a glass of water from the tap. He drank half of it standing at the sink. Imani kept drying glasses because she needed something to do with her hands, and she was not yet ready for whatever conversation was coming. She's at the hotel, he said. The Blackstone. I sent 2 of my people with her. Okay, Imani said, her father called. Sets the glass down. Conrad Laurent. You've seen him. He's come to the house twice in the last 4 months. Imani had seen him. Tall man, silver-haired, always wore a coat 1 season too heavy for the weather. She remembered thinking, the first time she had seen him walk through the front entrance, that he had the specific quality of a man who expected doors to open before he reached them. What did he say? She asked. Malachi looked at her. He wants a conversation tomorrow, in person. He paused. He was diplomatic about it. Conrad is always diplomatic. It's one of the ways you know he's furious. Is that a problem? Conrad Laurent furious is always a problem, Malachi said, in a tone that suggested this was a fact as plain as weather. But that's not what I came to talk to you about. Imani put the glass down. She turned to face him properly. Then what? He was quiet for a moment. The kitchen clock ticked. Outside the window above the sink, Chicago at 12:30 was a wash of orange light against low clouds. Rosa told you things tonight, he said. I could see it on your face when I came in. She told me about the others, Imani said. The ones who left. He nodded once. I should have known. You were away a lot. That's not an excuse, he said. It's a failure. And I'm naming it as a failure. He looked at the counter. I want to know everything. Not tonight, you don't have to do this tonight. But I need you to tell me what you know. And I need to know if there are others beyond the names you've already heard. Imani studied him. The particular quality of his attention, the way he was not looking past her or around her, the way he was simply waiting, in the full patience of a man who understood that some information couldn't be rushed, was the same quality that had made her trust him, cautiously, over 6 years. Not without reservation, but genuinely. I'll tell you everything I know, she said, but I want something in return. He didn't look surprised. He looked, if anything, the faintest degree more focused. What? I want the others protected. The people she pushed out, I want you to at least acknowledge what happened to them. Reach out. Make it right if you can. He was quiet for a beat. That's fair. And I want it in writing. Something shifted in his expression. Not offense. Something closer to recognition. You don't fully trust me, he said. I trust you more than most people, Imani said carefully. That's not the same as fully, and I've spent 6 years in this house watching the difference between what powerful men promise and what they actually do. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, all right, in writing. Imani nodded. Then yes, I'll tell you everything. She didn't tell him everything that night. She told him enough the names Rosa had given her. 2 additional incidents she had observed personally over the past months and filed away in the careful architecture of her memory, and one thing she had not yet connected to anything larger, but which felt, in the new context of the evening, suddenly significant. A series of invoices she had been managing as part of her logistics responsibilities for the household's supply chain. Duplicate shipment numbers. Vendors she didn't recognize billing for deliveries that didn't appear in any inventory she had been given access to. She had made copies. She always made copies of things that didn't add up. It was habit, not strategy. Malachi listened to her describe the invoices with the particular stillness of a man who has just heard a piece of information that means much more than the person delivering it realizes. He didn't interrupt. He didn't write anything down. He filed it, the way she filed things completely, immediately, in the part of his mind where dangerous information lived. Where are the copies? He asked when she finished. In my room, in a folder in the bottom drawer of my desk. He nodded. Keep them there, he said. Don't move them. Don't tell anyone about them. Can you do that? I already have been, she said, for months. He looked at her then with something she had never quite seen on his face before. It was not admiration exactly. It was the expression of a man recalibrating, adjusting the weight he had assigned to something or someone that he had understood in one way and was now being required to understand differently. Go to bed, Imani, he said. Tomorrow is going to be a long day. Most days are, she said. She left the kitchen and went back to her room and lay on top of the blankets without changing, and stared at the ceiling for an hour before she slept. Conrad Laurent arrived at 10 in the morning. He didn't call ahead. He didn't need to. The kind of men who called ahead were the kind of men who weren't sure they'd be let in. Imani was in the second-floor corridor when she heard the front door open. She heard Ferrante's voice, tightly controlled, and then Conrad's voice, which was the kind of voice that filled rooms without effort, not loud, simply inevitable. She heard 2 sets of footsteps that were not Ferrante's or Conrad's, which meant he had brought people with him, and the people he brought to private morning conversations were not assistants. She moved to the top of the staircase and looked down. Conrad Laurent stood in the entrance hall, in his heavy overcoat, looking around the room with the expression of a man performing a property assessment. He was in his early 60s. His silver hair was impeccable. His hands were at his sides, relaxed, which on Conrad Laurent meant he was in a state of controlled aggression, the way other men were in a state of rest. He didn't look up, but the 2 men behind him did. Imani stepped back from the banister and went to finish the linen count she had been doing before he arrived, because the linen count needed doing, and because she had learned that the most important thing you could do when dangerous men came into a building was to keep doing ordinary things with total concentration. She heard Malachi's door open on the floor below her. She did not hear what the 2 men said to each other in the study. She didn't need to, as it turned out. 40 minutes later, Rosa appeared at the door of the linen room, with a face like someone who had walked into a wall. He's asking for you, she said. Mr. Vescari, in the study. Imani put the linen count sheet down very carefully, making sure the corners aligned, which was not important, but gave her 5 seconds to settle her breathing before she stood up straight and walked to the study. She knocked. Come in, Malachi said. She came in. Conrad Laurent was seated in one of the leather chairs near the fireplace. He had removed his coat. His jacket was still on, buttoned. He looked at Imani the way a man looks at an object that has inconvenienced him, not with anger, but with the flat attention of someone deciding what to do with something that has become a problem. Malachi was standing. He was standing near the window with his arms crossed and the look on his face. That meant he had already been through something difficult in the last 40 minutes and was not finished. Imani cross, Conrad said. He smiled. It was a careful smile, the kind assembled from the right components without any of them meaning what they were supposed to mean. Malachi speaks very well of you. Thank you, she said. Please, sit. I'm fine standing, she said. Something moved through Conrad's eyes. Not anger. Something that had lived in the same neighborhood as anger. For so long it had its own key. As you like, he said. I'll be direct then, since we're all busy people. What happened last night was unfortunate. Imani waited. Sabine can be... Conrad paused, tilting his head slightly. Passionate. She and Malachi are both strong people, and strong people sometimes. Another pause. Another careful construction. React strongly. She poured champagne in my face, Imani said. In front of 200 people. Yes. Conrad nodded, as if she had confirmed something. And that was wrong of her. I want to be clear about that. It was wrong, and she knows it. He folded his hands in his lap, which is why I think a brief, public statement from you, acknowledging that it was a misunderstanding in a tense moment, that you bear no grievance. No, Imani said. Conrad stopped. The room was very quiet. I'm not going to say it was a misunderstanding, Imani said, because it wasn't. Conrad looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at Malachi. Then he looked back at Imani, and the careful smile had not disappeared, but it had gone thin, the way ice goes thin over water that's been moving underneath it all winter. I think, Conrad said gently, that you might be underestimating the complexity of the situation. I think I might be the only person in this room who isn't, Imani said. Malachi made a small sound. It was not quite a laugh. It was the sound of someone exhaling through their nose. When something unexpected happens. Conrad stood up. He was taller than Imani had registered from above the staircase. He moved to the center of the room with the slow ease of a man who knew that rooms reorganized themselves around him. And he looked at Imani from that new position, the way a chess player looks at a piece that has made an inconvenient move. Miss Cross, he said, and his voice had lost the diplomatic warmth, not dramatically, just gone, the way the sun goes behind a cloud. My daughter is going to marry Malachi Vescari. That is not a plan. That is a fact. And the future Mrs. Vescari cannot begin her life in this city with a narrative built around an altercation with household staff. Do you understand what I'm asking you to do and why? I understand what you're asking, Imani said. I'm telling you I won't do it. Malachi. Conrad turned. Explain to your employee what is at stake here. Malachi looked at Conrad from across the room. He looked at him the way he had looked at Sabine, the night before, not with heat, but with the specific cold quality of a decision already made being reflected back at someone who hadn't received it yet. She's not going to make the statement, Malachi said. Conrad was still. I beg your pardon. You heard me. The air in the room changed. It was the kind of change Imani could feel, against her skin a pressure drop, the sensation before a storm, the moment when two forces that have been circling each other's stop pretending they aren't. Malachi. Conrad's voice had dropped entirely. No warmth, no diplomacy, no careful construction. Just the baseline thing underneath all of it. I want you to think very carefully about what you are doing right now. I have been, Malachi said, for a while now. The engagement stands, Conrad said. That is not a request. That is a reality of what our two families have built together and what they stand to continue building. You want to throw that away. He stopped. He looked at Imani. He looked back at Malachi, and something crossed his face that was not quite disbelief, but was adjacent to it, the expression of a man encountering a variable he had not factored. For this? The word landed in the room like something dropped from a height. Imani felt it hit. Malachi felt it differently. She could see that. She could see the specific thing that happened in his jaw and around his eyes when a line was crossed that could not be uncrossed. He walked to the desk. He opened the top drawer. He took out his engagement ring. She did not know when he had removed it or when he had put it in the drawer. But there it was, and he walked to where Conrad was standing, and he placed the ring on the arm of the leather chair. The engagement is over, he said. Conrad looked at the ring. He did not pick it up. He looked at it the way a man looks at something he is going to remember for a long time. You understand what you're doing, Conrad said. It was not a question. Completely, Malachi said. Then you understand what comes next, Conrad said. I have been patient with you, Malachi. I have been more than patient. I have given you. You have given me nothing, Malachi said, and for the first time there was an edge in his voice, not loud, not theatrical, but present, the way the edge of a blade is present. Everything I have I built. Our arrangement was mutually beneficial. You know that. And what happened in my house last night, in front of my people, to a member of my household." He stopped, breathed once. "That does not come with a negotiation attached." Conrad picked up the ring. He held it for a moment. Then he slid it into his jacket pocket with the calm of a man pocketing a receipt. "1 week," Conrad said. "I'll give you 1 week to reconsider." After that, he shook his head. He put on his coat slowly, with the deliberateness of a man who wanted every second of the gesture to be observed. "After that, Malachi, the things that have been built between our families will begin to come apart, and that process will be—" He smiled again, the thin smile. Messy, he left. His 2 men followed him out. The front door closed. In the study, Malachi stood very still for a moment. Then he went to the window and looked out at the driveway, where Conrad's car was already pulling away. Imani stood near the door. She was not sure whether she should leave. She was not sure about a number of things. "Say it," Malachi said, without turning around. "Say what?" "Whatever you're thinking." She thought about it. "I'm thinking you just made an enemy of a very dangerous man on my behalf," she said. "And I'm thinking I don't know how to feel about that." "You don't have to feel anything about it," he said. "It was my decision. It affects my life," she said. "That gives me standing to have feelings about it." He turned from the window then and looked at her. There was something raw in the look, not vulnerable, exactly, but stripped of the several layers of professional distance he usually carried. "Fair," he said. "Then how do you feel?" She thought about it, honestly, the way she tried to think about everything. "Scared," she said. "And something else I don't have a word for yet." He nodded slowly. He moved to the desk and sat down, and for a moment he looked like a man carrying a weight that had just significantly increased in the last 20 minutes and was adjusting to the new distribution of it. "There's something I need to tell you," he said, "about Conrad, about why the marriage was arranged the way it was." Imani sat down in the chair across from the desk. She straightened her back. She waited. He told her. Not everything she understood later, that there were things he was still calculating, still protecting, but enough. The alliance between the Vescari and Laurent organizations had been in negotiation for 2 years. It had never been purely about Malachi and Sabine. It had been about combining specific operations, specific territories, specific channels of distribution, and influence that ran through both criminal networks. The marriage had been the mechanism, the legal and social architecture through which 2 empires would merge without attracting the kind of attention that a straightforward business arrangement would generate. Conrad had proposed it. Malachi had accepted because the terms had seemed, at the time, genuinely balanced. Because Conrad had seemed, at the time, like a man interested in partnership. "When did that change?" Imani asked. Malachi looked at the desk. "I started noticing things about 8 months ago. Around the time Sabine arrived, inconsistencies in how certain people were being positioned, introductions that didn't need to happen, paperwork that arrived with small errors in it that seemed accidental and didn't feel accidental." He paused. "I didn't have enough to act on. I kept watching." "And the invoices?" Imani said slowly. He met her eyes. "If what you described is what I think it is, yes. The invoices." The room was very quiet. "He's been using the engagement," Imani said. Not a question. Working it out as she spoke. "To place people inside your organization. Inside my organization and inside this house," Malachi said. "And after the wedding, with Sabine as his access point and a legal merger in place, he would have had everything he needed to." "Take it," Imani said. "Take it," he confirmed. She sat with that for a moment. The clock on the mantel marked the seconds. Outside, Chicago moved through its ordinary late morning without any awareness of what was being understood in this room. He would have let Sabine believe she was marrying for love, Imani said, or for social positioning, and all along she was the mechanism. "I don't know what Sabine knew," Malachi said. "That's a question I don't have an answer to yet." Imani thought about Sabine's face the night before. The fury, the jealousy, the contempt. The specific flavor of a woman who believed she was acting on her own instincts, her own feelings, her own power. She thought maybe she was. Maybe Conrad is the kind of man whose instruments never know they're being played, she thought. Or maybe she knew exactly what she was doing and found the personal parts useful cover. She did not say either of those things out loud. Not yet. "The folder," she said, "in my room. The copies I made. I need to see them," Malachi said. "Not this morning. Tonight, when the house is quiet. I need to see exactly what you have." She nodded. She stood up. She moved to the door. And then she stopped with her hand on the doorframe because something had occurred to her, something that had been snotting at the back of her mind since Conrad had walked out, and that had now moved close enough to see clearly. "He knows about the invoices," she said. Malachi looked up sharply. "Not specifically," she said. "He doesn't know I made copies, but he knows what the invoices represent. And if he's been running this long enough to embed people in your organization, then he knows there are records somewhere that could expose him." She paused. "When he figures out that I've been the one managing the household supply chain, when he figures out that I would have been the one to see the discrepancy sign." The silence in the room became a different kind of silence. "He'll come for the records," Malachi said. "He'll come for me," Imani said. Malachi stood up from the desk in one motion. "I need to make some calls," he said. "Right now. Do not go back to your room. Do not touch the folder. Stay in the main part of the house where Ferrante can see you." He was already moving around the desk, already reaching for his phone. "Imani," she turned. "I'm going to fix this," he said. She looked at him. At the certainty in his face and the weight behind the certainty, the weight of a man who understood that fixing things sometimes meant breaking them first, and who had a very long history of being willing to do both. "I know," she said, and she meant it, which frightened her more than anything Conrad Laurent had said. Because trusting that a man like Malachi Vescari was going to protect her was not the same thing as being safe. It was simply the best option she had left in a house that was no longer just a house, in a life that was no longer going to be what it had been yesterday morning. On a day that had begun with a linen count and was ending with the certain knowledge that somewhere in this city, a very dangerous man had just realized she was no longer invisible and had begun to decide what to do about it. The call Malachi made lasted 11 minutes. Imani knew this because she was sitting in the main corridor outside the study, on the hard wooden bench that had been there since before she started working in the house. And she counted the minutes the way she counted, everything carefully, without meaning to, because her brain did not know how to let time pass without marking it. Ferrante stood near the front door, with his arms crossed and his eyes on the entrance. He hadn't spoken to her since Malachi had told him to keep her in sight. He was not unfriendly about it. He was simply doing what he did, which was standing between things that needed protecting and the directions from which trouble came. Rosa had disappeared somewhere into the back of the house. The 2 junior kitchen staff, who usually came in at 10, had been quietly sent home. The mansion, which on an ordinary morning hummed with the particular low frequency of a large household in motion, was now very still. Imani sat with her hands in her lap and thought about the folder in the bottom drawer of her desk. She had started keeping it 14 months ago, not because she had suspected anything specific, because she had been trained, by years of managing logistics for a household that ran like a mid-sized company, to notice when numbers didn't agree with each other. And the invoices she had started seeing in the household supply chain, the ones that came in through the secondary vendor accounts, that Sabine had quietly added to the approved list in her first month, had not agreed with anything. Duplicate shipment reference numbers. Vendors registered to addresses that, when she had looked them up out of pure professional instinct, resolved to vacant commercial properties in Cicero and Hammond. Line items for goods that never appeared in any inventory she controlled. She had flagged 2 of them to the house accountant, a man named Griggs, who had told her they were probably clerical errors from a new vendor system, and that he would look into it. He had not looked into it. She had made copies anyway. She had organized them in a Manilafe folder, with her own handwritten notes in the margins, reference numbers, the addresses she had looked up, the discrepancies she had calculated. She had told herself she was being overly cautious, possibly paranoid, definitely not being paid enough to take this kind of personal initiative. She had filed the folder and gone back to work. 14 months later, she was sitting on a hard bench in a very quiet mansion, understanding that she had accidentally documented the financial architecture of a criminal infiltration operation, and that the man running that operation was currently riding through Chicago in a town car, deciding what to do about her. The study door opened. Malachi came out. He was on the phone still, but he was ending the call, a few words, short and final, and then he lowered the phone and looked at Ferrante. Something passed between them, in the way things pass between people who had worked alongside each other for long enough that language was only sometimes necessary. Ferrante put on his jacket and left through the front door without a word. Malachi looked at Imani. "Come with me," he said. She followed him to the study. He went to the window first, looked out at the driveway, looked at the street beyond the gate. Whatever he was checking for, he apparently found the situation acceptable, because he moved to the desk and sat down and pointed at the chair across from him. She sat. "I need to ask you something," he said, "and I need you to answer it exactly, without softening it." "All right," she said. "Griggs," he said, the accountant. "How many times did you bring him something that didn't add up?" She thought back. "Twice. Once. About 16 months ago, a delivery charge that came through twice for the same date. Different vendors. Once about 11 months ago, the address discrepancy I mentioned earlier. And both times he told you it was a clerical error. Both times." Malachi was quiet. He was looking at the desk surface, not at her, but not in the way of someone distracted, in the way of someone assembling something in their mind and making sure every piece was where they thought it was before they said anything. "Griggs has been with me for 9 years, he said. Imani said nothing. She understood what was underneath that sentence. She let it breathe. "He came with a recommendation from Conrad," Malachi said, and his voice was completely even, which was worse, somehow, than if it had not been. 4 years before the engagement. Conrad called him, and I remember this specifically now, which is the part that is going to stay with me. Conrad called him the most honest numbers man I've ever worked with. Those were the exact words. The room was very quiet. "He's been there the whole time," Imani said. "Not just Griggs," Malachi said. "I've spent the last 11 minutes on the phone with a man I trust more than almost anyone alive, and what he's told me is that there are potentially 3 others. In positions that would give Conrad's people visibility into every legitimate financial operation I run, every warehouse manifest, every shipping contract, every licensing arrangement my companies have with the city." Imani thought about the invoices in her folder. 14 months of documentation. She thought about the pattern she had seen without understanding it, the way the duplicate numbers appeared in clusters. 3 or 4 in a month, then nothing for 6 weeks, then another cluster. Like pulses, like a heartbeat. "He was mapping you," she said. "The invoices, they're not just laundering or skimming. They're an inventory. He was building a complete picture of everything you own and how it moves." Malachi looked at her. "The clusters," she said. "In my notes, I wrote down that the anomalies came in groups, every 6 to 8 weeks. Do you have a recurring event on that cycle? Something operational?" He was very still. "Quarterly reporting reviews," he said slowly. "We do them monthly, but the full operational reviews, the ones that go across all entities, happen every 6 to 8 weeks. He was timing the ghost invoices to the review cycles," Imani said. "Someone inside was feeding him the review schedules. It'd send through a cluster of documentation, look like normal volume, bury the fake shipments in the noise of a high activity period." She stopped, heard herself. You sound like someone who has been looking at this data for over a year," Malachi said, "without knowing what you were looking at." She pressed her hands flat on her knees. "I need to get the folder." "Not yet," he said. "I want 2 of my people in this building first. People Conrad has had no contact with. That's what Ferrante went to arrange." He checked his phone. 20 minutes. 20 minutes felt like a significant length of time. "The employees Sabine pushed out," Imani said, keeping her voice steady by the effort of professional habit. "Were any of them in positions where they would have seen the same invoices I saw?" Malachi looked at her with the expression of a man who is 1 step behind on a sequence and knows it. "Who?" "Daniel," she said. "He was managing the vendor relationships before he left. If he was flagging the same things I flagged, then Griggs didn't just fail to investigate," Malachi said, and his voice had gone completely flat. "He reported it to Conrad, and Conrad told Sabine to create a reason to remove Daniel from the house." The silence that followed was the kind that comes after something has been understood that cannot be ununderstood. She wasn't just being cruel, Imani said. The people she pushed out were inconveniences, Malachi said, to an operation she may or may not have understood she was protecting. Imani thought about Sabine's face again. The specific quality of her contempt, the way it had felt personal, felt like a woman acting on pure instinct and wounded pride. She had believed in the ballroom that she was watching a jealous woman lashing out. She still believed some of that was real. But real feelings could be useful. Real feelings could be cultivated by a patient man with a plan. You didn't have to manufacture jealousy in a proud woman. You only had to put her in proximity to a situation that fed it. He used her, Imani said. He used her feelings to protect his operation. Or she chose to protect it, Malachi said. I don't know which. And right now, I'm not sure it matters. A door opened somewhere in the back of the house. Both of them went still. Then Rose's voice, saying something in Spanish to someone, and the tension dropped a degree. Malachi stood and went to the window again. He had a quality, in crisis, of needing to see the perimeter to physically orient himself to the space he was defending. She had noticed it before, in smaller moments. It was clearer now. The man I called, he said, without turning around. His name is not something you need to know. But he told me something else, something beyond Griggs and the others. He paused. 3 of my captains have been contacted in the last 48 hours, not by Conrad directly, through intermediaries, offers of new arrangements, better terms, guarantees of what happens to their operations in the transition. The transition, Imani repeated. Conrad's word, apparently. He turned from the window. He was moving before I put the ring on the table. He had already begun. The engagement ending just accelerated his timeline. The 20 minutes were not up. But Imani stood up anyway, because she could not still sense of this understanding. She walked to the far side of the room and stood near the bookshelf, and looked at the books without reading their titles, because she needed somewhere to put her eyes that wasn't Malachi's face. He came here this morning, she said. He sat in that chair and asked me to make a statement, knowing all of this, knowing what was already in motion. He came to see if I would back down, Malachi said. And to look at you, she turned at me. To assess, Malachi said, how much you knew, how much I'd told you, whether you were a variable he needed to account for or just a convenient excuse I'd used to end the engagement. She thought about Conrad Laurent sitting in the leather chair with his hands folded, the way he had looked at her. She had read it as contempt, the same contempt she was accustomed to from people like him, the flat assessment of a person who has decided, you are beneath attention. She had been wrong. It had not been contempt. It had been evaluation. The difference was subtle, and the consequences of misreading it were significant. He decided I was a variable, she said. Yes, Malachi said. I think he did. When? Probably when you said what you said in this room. He moved to the desk. You didn't perform. You didn't defer. You answered him directly, and you refused him directly. A woman who was simply caught in the middle of someone else's drama doesn't do that. A woman who knows something does that. Imani pressed her fingers against the spine of a book she wasn't reading. I didn't know enough at that point to be that certain. He didn't know that, Malachi said. And Conrad Laurent does not take chances on things he doesn't know. The front door opened. Ferrante's voice. 2 other voices. Malachi moved toward the study door. Stay here, he said. Not unkindly. I'll be back in 5 minutes. He was back in 4. He came in with a man Imani had seen once before at one of the large dinners, standing near the back wall in the kind of position that meant he was not a guest. His name, she learned now, was Theo. He was somewhere in his late 40s with a quality of absolute physical economy, no wasted movement, no unnecessary gesture, and eyes that took in the room in one pass and filed everything permanently. Theo looked at Imani the way Malachi had looked at the perimeter. Assessment, not hostility. She has documents, Malachi told him, in her room. I need them retrieved without going through the East Corridor. Why not the East Corridor? Imani asked. Because Griggs's office is adjacent to it, Malachi said, and until I know exactly what he has access to in this building, I don't want him to see what we're moving. Theo nodded once and left without a word. Imani sat back down. What happens to Griggs? Not yet, Malachi said. If I move on Griggs now, Conrad knows I've identified the network. I need to know the full shape of it before I do anything visible. And if Griggs figures out we're looking, and we lose the advantage of surprise, Malachi said, and his voice had gone to that particular flat register. That meant he was in the part of his mind where things were purely tactical, which is why we need to move quickly and quietly, and not give him any reason to make a phone call before tonight. Theo returned in 8 minutes with the folder. It was thicker than Imani remembered. Or maybe it was just that it looked different now that it was on the desk between herself and Malachi, in the full light of what it actually was. 14 months of careful, quiet, professional documentation. A woman keeping copies of things that didn't add up, because it was her habit, because she was thorough, because she had a memory that didn't let things go. Malachi opened it. He read in silence. He turned pages slowly, and Imani watched his face and saw the specific progression of a man finding, one by one, the things he had feared to find. Not shock. Malachi Vescari did not shock easily. Something more controlled than shock and more honest than composure. The expression of a man absorbing a reality that was worse than he had calculated. He stopped at her handwritten notes on the third section. These addresses, he said. You looked them up yourself. I used the county property record, she said. It took about 20 minutes per address. I did it on my phone on lunch breaks. He looked at the notes. He looked at her. He looked at the notes again. You've been doing this for 14 months. I made copies of things that didn't make sense, she said. I do that. I always have. This is not a folder of things that don't make sense, he said quietly. This is a complete record of a financial filtration operation, with annotations. I didn't know that when I started keeping it. I know, he said. That's what makes it. He stopped. He closed the folder. He put his hand flat on top of it. The way a person puts their hand on something they need to feel is still real. Imani, you need to understand what you're holding. Tell me, she said. Every ghost vendor in this folder, he said, connects to a real entity if you follow the registration chain far enough. Conrad's people were sloppy in one specific way. They used the same formation agent for 3 of the shell companies. If that agent is on record somewhere accessible, and if the formations are within the window for mandatory disclosure filings, he stopped again. This breaks his entire structure open. Not just the infiltration here, the whole network. The room was very, very quiet. That's why he came here this morning, Imani said slowly. That's why he looked at me the way he did. She felt something cold move through the center of her chest. He already knew about the invoices. He knew there was a documentation risk. He came to look at me and decide if I was the risk. And you confirmed it, Malachi said, by being exactly what you are. She wanted to be angry at that. She found she couldn't quite get there. So what do we do? Before Malachi could answer, Theo appeared in the doorway. His face was the same careful neutral it had been before. But there was something in the way he was standing, a slight change in the angle of his shoulders that made both Malachi and Imani go still. We have a problem, Theo said. Malachi waited. Griggs left the building 20 minutes ago, Theo said. Through the service entrance. He told the kitchen staff he was going to get lunch. He left his phone on his desk. The silence lasted exactly 2 seconds. He made contact, Malachi said. It was not a question. There's a landline in the basement utility room, Theo said. We have a log of outgoing calls on that line. 23 minutes ago, it made a 6-minute call to a number registered to a courier company in Bridgeport. Conrad, Malachi said. Almost certainly, Theo said. The number connects to 3 other calls in the past 8 months, all from landlines in this building, all 6 to 9 minutes. Imani looked at Malachi. His jaw was tight. The controlled exhaustion she had seen on his face at midnight had been replaced by something sharper and less forgiving. He knows we have the folder, she said. He knows something moved, Malachi said. He doesn't know the contents. But Conrad doesn't need to know the contents to act. He needs to know that his timeline is compromised. He stood up. Theo, I need the building secured in the next 15 minutes. Everyone who came in through Conrad's recommendations, I need them contained, not released, not contacted. Can you do that without alerting them? I can do 4 of them, Theo said. The 5th is already gone. He called in sick this morning. The 5th, Malachi said slowly. Which one? Theo told him a name. Imani watched Malachi's face and saw something happen there that she had not seen before. Not anger, not calculation. Something underneath both of those, something that looked, for a brief and unguarded moment, like the expression of a man who has just had the floor from beneath him. Say that again, Malachi said. Theo said the name again. Malachi sat down, slowly, the way a person sits when their legs have made the decision before their mind catches up. He put both hands on the desk and looked at the wood surface and breathed once, carefully through his nose. How long, he said. And his voice was very quiet. Has he been in that position? 11 years, Theo said. 11 years before Conrad, before the engagement, before any of it. Imani looked at Malachi's face and understood. In the particular way she understood things completely, immediately, without being told the rest, that the man whose name Theo had just said was not one of Conrad's plants. He was something worse. He was the reason Conrad had known, from the beginning, exactly how to design the infiltration. He was the reason the shell company addresses were in the right boroughs. The review cycle timing was accurate. The ghost vendors had slipped through the right approval channels. He was the reason Conrad had walked into the engagement with such confidence, such certainty, such patience. He was the reason Conrad had never needed to rush. "Who is he?" Imani said quietly to Malachi. Malachi looked up at her. The look on his face was the look of a man who has just had to revise 11 years of his own history and found that the revision changes nearly everything. Was my most trusted captain," Malachi said. "He was at my father's table. He helped me build everything that came after." He stopped. "His name is Vincent Riel. And if he has been with Conrad for 11 years, then Conrad didn't approach this organization from the outside." He picked up the folder. He set it back down. He looked at Theo. "He built his way in from the inside," Malachi said, "before I was even running it. Conrad has had a man inside this organization since before I inherited it. The full weight of it settled over the room like something physical, not an infiltration, not a takeover attempt that began with an engagement, a decade-long preparation, a patient, precise dismantling built into the structure from the foundation. Every decision Malachi had made in 11 years, every expansion, every alliance, every legitimate company he had built as a bridge out of the criminal world had been made with Vincent Riel at the table, had been influenced subtly, carefully, over years, toward the shape that Conrad needed. He didn't try to take your empire," Imani said, and her voice was very quiet. "He designed it, from the beginning, for himself." Malachi said nothing. "The engagement was never the mechanism," she continued. "Sabine was never the mechanism. They were the distraction. The real mechanism has been inside this organization for 11 years, steering it toward the moment when Conrad could step in and claim what was already built for him." Theo was watching Malachi. Ferrante had appeared behind him in the doorway. Both men were waiting with the particular patience of people who understood that the man at the desk needed 30 seconds to finish absorbing something before he could be useful again. Malachi lifted his head. The expression on his face was not what Imani expected. Not collapse, not fury. Something that had burned through both of those and come out the other side, a cold, clear, stripped-down thing that was almost purely functional. The expression of a man who has had everything he thought he knew about the last 11 years revised in the space of 4 minutes and has already begun, somewhere behind his eyes, to build from the new foundation. "Pull everything," he said to Theo. "Every financial record, every operational log, every communication Riel touched in the past 3 years. I want it in this room tonight." He looked at Ferrante. "I want 2 people on Imani at all times. Not in the building. She's not staying in the building tonight." Imani started. "Conrad knows the folder exists," he said. "Riel knows this house better than anyone. He knows every entrance, every security rotation, every blind spot." He looked at her directly. "You are not staying here." She wanted to argue. The argument built up behind her sternum with the particular pressure of a woman who has spent 6 years being managed and is now very tired of it. But she looked at his face. She looked at what was in his face, not control, not dismissal, something that was closer to the edge of fear than she had ever seen on him, and that she understood was not about his empire or his operation or the 11 years being revised. It was about the folder. It was about her. She picked the folder up from the desk. She held it against her chest with both arms the way a person holds something they have decided they are not letting go of. And she looked at Malachi Vescari across the desk and said, "I'm not a package to be moved. I go where I decide to go." He looked at her. "But I decide to go somewhere safe tonight," she said. "So tell me where you're sending me." Something moved through his face relief, possibly, or the specific feeling that lives adjacent to relief when the situation doesn't fully allow for it. "A safe house on the north side," he said. 12 people. Nobody Conrad has ever had a name for. He paused. "You'll be back. This isn't permanent. But tonight is tonight," she said. "Fine." She walked to the door. She stopped. Without turning around because she was not quite ready for whatever would be on his face if she turned, she said, "Vincent Riel. 11 years. "Yes," Malachi said. Then the person who actually built your empire, she said, wasn't Conrad. It wasn't real. It was you, because you're still standing after both of them spent 11 years trying to make sure you wouldn't be. She walked out of the study before he could answer her. She went to her room, packed what she needed in 12 minutes, looked once at the bottom drawer of her desk. Empty now, the folder gone to the desk downstairs and stood in the center of the small room she had lived in for 6 years. The room felt different, not smaller, just no longer hers in the way it had been this morning, when her worst problem was an engagement party she resented and a dream she had named and then refused to name. Cross Harbor House, she thought. 11 rooms, a wraparound porch, full of potential. She picked up her bag. She walked out. She did not look back at the room. And in the car that took her north through a city that did not know what was burning quietly, in one of its mansions, she held the image of a lakeside inn, in her mind, the way a person holds a candle in a wind carefully, with both hands, absolutely refusing to let it go out. The safe house on the north side was a 3-flat on a street that looked like every other street in the neighborhood, modest, maintained, unremarkable. The kind of building that had a landlord nobody had met and tenants nobody could describe. Imani arrived at 11:15 that night. She was given the second floor. 2 rooms, a small kitchen, a window that faced the back alley and not the street. One of Theo's men, she never got his name. He didn't offer it, showed her where the exits were, where the fire escape went, and where not to stand near the windows after dark. He said all of this in the flat, informational tone of a man delivering a safety briefing on an airplane, and then he left her alone. She sat on the edge of the bed. She looked at her hands. Her right hand had a small cut on the heel of her palm from a piece of broken glass in the ballroom that she had not noticed until now. It had dried into a thin, dark line. It didn't hurt. Or it had been hurting for 2 days, and she had simply stopped registering it. She pressed her thumb against it until it did hurt. That was real. That was manageable. Everything else was very large and had no edges she could press against. She did not sleep well. She slept in pieces 40 minutes, then awake, then an hour, then awake again, with the specific heart-hammering alertness of someone whose body has decided. Sleep is a security risk. In the stretches of wakefulness, she lay very still and organized what she knew the way she organized inventory, by category, by date, by what was confirmed and what was inference. Vincent Reel, the invoices, 14 months. Griggs, the landline call, 6 minutes. Conrad in the study, with his careful hands and his thin smile, and the ring he had dropped into his jacket pocket like a receipt. She thought about Daniel, who had left in February with a reference letter and a story about family in Guadalajara. She thought about the 3 others Nemoza had given her in the kitchen. She thought about the way each of them had been moved out of the house, not explosively, not visibly, but steadily, one at a time, in the way that a careful surgeon removes complications from a field before the main operation begins. She had been next. She understood that now, lying in the dark in a room she didn't know. Sabine's attack in the ballroom, the humiliation, the champagne, the wrist she had grabbed, that had not been spontaneous. Or it had been, in the specific way that things are spontaneous, when someone has been carefully cultivated toward a breaking point. Sabine had been angry. The anger was real. But the target of the anger, the timing of it, the very public nature of it, that had been useful to Conrad's purposes in a way that suggested, to Imani's careful and increasingly exhausted mind, that useful was not accidental. Remove Imani from the house before she connects enough dots to be dangerous. Except it had gone wrong, because Malachi had knelt on the marble floor and picked up a champagne flute, and that had changed everything. She was still thinking about that, still lying in the dark, tracing the thread from the broken glass to the folder to the safe house, when her phone buzzed at 6 in the morning. Malachi. She answered before the second buzz. "Are you all right?" he said. "Yes," she said. "Are you?" "A beat. I've been better." His voice had the quality of a man who had also not slept. "I need you to look at something. I'm going to send you photographs of 3 documents. I need you to tell me if the reference numbers match anything in your notes." "I have the folder here," she said. "I know. I sent it with you." "Open it." He sent 9 photographs. She spread the folder open on the bed and went through it page by page, with her phone propped against the pillow for light. It took 40 minutes. She found 3 matches, partial reference numbers, that appeared as fragments in two of the ghost invoices, embedded in the middle of longer strings, the kind of thing you'd miss if you were looking at the full number and not the component sequence. Here, she said. Invoice dated 11 months ago, the second page of the Meridian Freight account. The middle segment of the reference number, 7 digits, 4179032. She heard him writing. And the second one? They worked through it for another 30 minutes. By the time they were finished, the light in the room had shifted from gray to pale yellow, and she was sitting cross-legged on the bed, with the folder spread across her lap and pages she had flagged with torn strips of a paper towel, because she hadn't packed, sticky notes, and was not about to let that stop her. These connect to Real's operational accounts, Malachi said when she had given him the third match. Not directly, there are 2 shell layers between them, but the sequence pattern confirms it. It's the same formation, Agent. He paused. You found this in 40 minutes. I was looking for specific numbers, she said. It's easier when you know what you're looking for. Most people wouldn't have known what to look for, he said. She didn't answer that. She was looking at the page in her lap, at her own handwriting in the margins, 14 months of careful notations in her small, precise hand. She thought about all the lunch breaks, all the county property record lookups, all the moments she had told herself she was probably being paranoid. What happens now? She said. He told her. The plan was not simple, but it had the particular quality of things built by people who have no room for error, a tightness, a specificity, an absence of anything optional. Theo had spent the night building a complete map of Conrad's placement network, using the folder as a foundation. 3 of the 4 internal contacts had been quietly contained, not removed, not alerted, simply placed in situations that limited their ability to communicate. Griggs had returned from his lunch to find his office locked, and 2 of Theo's people in the corridor, and had apparently understood what that meant without being told, because he had sat down in a chair outside his office and had not moved or spoken in 4 hours. The 4th internal contact, a shipping coordinator named Park, had not returned. Park is the one I'm concerned about, Malachi said. He has enough operational knowledge to be genuinely useful to Conrad. If he's already talking, then Conrad knows the timeline has collapsed, Imani said. Yes. So he'll move. Tonight, Malachi said, or tomorrow morning at the latest. He can't wait. Everything he's built depends on moving before we can use the folder. She thought about the freight terminal, about how these things resolve. She had watched enough of the machinery of this world over 6 years to understand that the final conversation, the one that settled everything, did not happen in studies or kitchens. It happened somewhere industrial and empty and far enough from ordinary life that the sounds of it didn't carry. Where? She said. He doesn't know I know about Real yet, Malachi said. I've kept it contained. I'm going to use that. You're going to offer him a meeting, she said. Let him think he still has the advantage. I'm going to offer him a resolution, Malachi said. Something that sounds enough like surrender to get him to the table. And then I'm going to show him exactly what we have and exactly who among his people has already agreed to walk away from him. Has anyone agreed to walk away from him? A pause. 2 of his lieutenants, Malachi said. Once I showed them the evidence that Conrad had documented their personal operations as assets to be absorbed rather than alliances to be honored. The thing about Conrad's plan is that it was very good for Conrad and relatively catastrophic for everyone adjacent to Conrad. Another pause. People tend to respond to that information with some urgency. She almost smiled. And Riel? Riel is the piece I haven't resolved, Malachi said, and his voice went flat in the way it went flat when he was managing something at the edge of what he could manage. Riel I have to handle differently. Because it's personal, she said. Because it's 11 years, he said. And because the man trained me, after my father. He stopped. Started again. He taught me how to read a room, how to know which people were going to stay and which ones were going to leave, how to tell the difference between loyalty and performance. A long beat. Turns out he was exceptional at one of those things. She said nothing. Some things didn't have a useful response. I need you to do something, Malachi said. Tonight. She waited. I need you to come to the terminal, he said. Malachi inside. I need you outside with Ferrante and 2 others, with a complete copy of the folder in a format that can be delivered to 3 separate locations simultaneously if anything goes wrong inside. His voice was steady, operational. If I don't send a specific signal within 2 hours of entering, Ferrante delivers the copies. One to a federal prosecutor's office. One to a journalist I trust. One to an attorney who has been holding a sealed brief on Conrad's legitimate companies for 7 months. She understood what he was asking. He was not asking her to be present. He was asking her to be the failsafe. To be the person holding the consequence of what happens inside, so that what happened inside could not be buried. Why me, she said. Theo goes in with me, he said. Ferrante can execute the delivery, but I need someone outside that building tonight, who Conrad's people don't know to look for. Someone who can move without being tracked. He paused. Someone I trust with the complete picture. The complete picture. She sat with that for a moment. All right, she said. Tell me where, he told her. He told her the time, the signal, the sequence for the deliveries. He told her which attorney, which prosecutor, which journalist, 3 names, 3 addresses, all of which she repeated back to him from memory without writing them down, because she did not write down things she needed to keep safe. I'll be there, she said. I know, he said. And then, after a pause that had a specific weight to it, Imani. What? I'm sorry, he said. For all of it. The whole shape of it. You came to work in a house and you ended up... He stopped. I'm sorry. She looked at the folder in her lap. At 14 months of her own careful handwriting. At a woman's attempt to make sense of numbers that didn't add up in a house where the particular variety of danger involved was one she had never been hired to manage. Don't be sorry yet, she said. Wait until tonight is over. She heard him breathe. Fair enough, he said. She hung up and sat in the pale morning light and looked at the cut on her palm. Then she got up, made coffee in the small kitchen, and began preparing. The abandoned Lakeshore Freight Terminal sat at the edge of the industrial corridor, south of the river, a long, low building with loading docks that had last seen active use 6 years ago, surrounded by chain link and the particular silence of infrastructure that the city has forgotten about without yet deciding to demolish. The kind of place that had a history of being used for exactly the kind of meeting that was about to happen in it. Imani arrived with Ferrante and 2 men she had not met before in a car that had been switched twice during the drive. She wore dark clothing, flat shoes, and carried the folder in a waterproof envelope inside a bag across her body. She had a second phone Theo had given her that morning, with the 3 delivery addresses already entered. She had the signal, a specific 2-word text from Malachi's personal number. They parked 2 blocks east. Ferrante pointed to a position behind a concrete barrier near the fence line that gave a clear sightline to 3 of the terminal's 4 exits and was itself not visible from the road. The 2 men she didn't know took separate positions. Ferrante stayed with her. It was 9:43. Malachi was already inside. Ferrante had the specific quality of stillness that came from a lifetime of waiting in positions like this one, and he radiated it without performing it, which meant Imani could match it without effort. She stood behind the barrier with her back against the concrete and the bug across her chest, and she breathed slowly and thought about nothing except the next thing. At 10:07, a convoy of 3 vehicles arrived at the terminal's main entrance. Conrad Laurent got out of the middle vehicle. Even from 2 blocks east, in the dark, she recognized the silhouette, the heavy coat, the particular way he moved, the 2 men who materialized on either side of him without being summoned. He stood outside the entrance for a moment, looking at the building, and then he went inside. The door closed. Ferrante's phone buzzed. He looked at it and showed her the screen. 1 word from Theo, set. She nodded. The next 40 minutes were the longest of her life. Not because nothing was happening. Something was clearly happening. The tension was audible even from outside, or she told herself it was, or she was simply so attuned to the shape of this moment that her body was constructing sounds that matched her internal state. She stood very still. She breathed. She did not look at her phone. She looked at the building. At 10:51, someone ran out of the terminal's east exit. Not Malachi. Not Theo. A man she didn't recognize, short, moving fast, heading toward the fence. One of Ferrante's men intercepted him before he reached it. There was a brief, ugly struggle and then stillness, and then the man was on the ground, and the fence was intact. Ferrante watched this with the expression of someone watching something expected. Yeah. That's Park, he said quietly. Imani looked at the man on the ground, the shipping coordinator who hadn't come back. He was not badly hurt. She could see him moving, sitting up, putting his hands where the other man indicated. He looked very young, she thought. Too young. The kind of young that made her think about which decisions had brought him here, and how many of those decisions he had understood the weight of at the time. She looked back at the terminal. At 11:03, her phone buzzed. 2 words from Malachi's number. Harbor clear. She exhaled. She looked at Ferrante. He was already reading his own phone. He nodded. Stand down, he said quietly into his earpiece. Imani pressed her back against the concrete and closed her eyes for exactly 5 seconds. She allowed herself 5 seconds of that specific relief, the kind that lives in the body, not the mind, the kind that comes out of muscles that have been held at a controlled tension for long enough that releasing them is almost painful. Then she opened her eyes and straightened and waited. Malachi came out of the terminal's main entrance at 11:17. He was walking. That was the first thing she assessed, that he was walking under his own power, that his gait was even. He had his jacket, which was not torn. He had a cut above his left eyebrow that was bleeding in the slow, steady way of cuts on the forehead, and he was pressing the back of his hand against it, with the distracted air of a man who has registered the damage and filed it as non-critical. Theos was beside him. Theo had a split lip and a way of holding his right arm slightly away from his body that suggested a rib had received more impact than was ideal. Behind them, 2 of the men who had come with Conrad were being walked out by 4 of Malachi's people, with the distinct posture of men who had made their assessment of the situation and found surrender to be the more logical position. Conrad was not among them. Imani walked toward Malachi. Ferrante was half a step behind her. Malachi saw her at 20 feet, and something in his face shifted, a fractional release of something that had been held very tight. And then he was walking toward her, and they met in the middle of a dark parking lot outside an abandoned freight terminal with the city glowing orange to the north. You're bleeding, she said. I know, he said. What happened in there? He looked at her for a moment. She could see him deciding how much to say, then deciding to say all of it. Conrad came expecting to negotiate from strength, he said. He had Real with him. He paused on the name. Real had his own idea about how things should resolve. Did he? He thought that with Conrad's backing and 11 years of positional advantage, the cleanest outcome was for him to take over the active operations and cut Conrad out of the share he'd been promised. Malachi pressed his hand against the eyebrow again. He made that proposal while Conrad was still in the room. Imani stared. He betrayed Conrad. In front of Conrad. 11 years of patience, Malachi said, and at the moment of resolution, he couldn't wait 20 minutes. Something moved through his voice that was not quite bitterness and not quite dark humor, but lived between the two. I spent 11 years wondering if I was the most patient man in the room. Turns out I was the second. Where is Real now? Malachi looked at her steadily. He made a choice, he said, at the end. When everything was on the table, the folder, the 2 lieutenants who had already flipped, Park, the complete financial record, he looked at the room and he made a choice. She waited. He walked out, Malachi said, through the north exit. Alone, a beat, I let him go. She looked at his face. Why? Because I've known him for 20 years, Malachi said. And because the evidence already destroys him, without me needing to be the one to do it personally. And because he stopped. Because some things you let go of, not because it's the right strategic decision, but because you need to be able to live with who you are afterward. She understood that. She understood it in a way that surprised her, or didn't surprise her at all, but felt important to notice. And Conrad? She said. Malachi looked back toward the terminal. Conrad is inside, he said, with 2 attorneys who arrived 20 minutes ago and a federal agent who has been building a case against his legitimate companies for 3 years and was very interested to receive a call tonight. You called the federal agent, she said. You made that possible, he said. The folder made that possible. Without the documentation trail, without 14 months of your careful, detailed, annotated documentation. He shook his head. He would have denied everything. His lawyers would have built a wall around him that would have taken years to dismantle. He looked at her. You had the only evidence that connected the shell companies to real operations, the only chain of custody that a prosecutor could actually use. She thought about lunch breaks, about a county property record website on her phone, about the particular stubbornness of a woman who kept copies of things that didn't add up because it was her habit and she didn't know how to operate any other way. I wasn't trying to save anyone, she said. I was trying to do my job correctly. I know, he said. That's the part that matters. Theo said something to Malachi in a low voice. Malachi nodded. Theo moved away toward the cars. Malachi and Imani stood in the parking lot of an abandoned freight terminal at 11:20 at night, and Chicago moved around them in its ordinary, indifferent way. And for a moment, neither of them said anything. She became aware in the silence that her hands were shaking slightly, not from fear. The aftermath of sustained tension, the way the body releases things when it's finally safe to release them, all at once, without warning. She pressed her hands flat against the bag on her chest. You're cold, Malachi said. I'm fine, she said, which was what she always said, and which was approximately 40% true. He took off his jacket. She shook her head. You're bleeding. The jacket isn't, he said, and held it out. She looked at him. She took the jacket. She put it around her shoulders, not on. She was not quite ready for on, and the warmth of it was immediate and real, and she hated how much she needed it. What happens now, she said, tomorrow, next week. I dismantle what I can dismantle, he said. The operations that are connected to the violent side, I cut them. I've been planning to for longer than this. He gestured vaguely at the terminal, the parking lot, the whole accumulated wreckage of the last 72 hours. This accelerates the decision. The legitimate companies survive. Everything else ends. That's a significant thing to walk away from, she said. Yes, he said simply. But I've been walking toward it for a while. He stopped. I needed a reason that was larger than the difficulty of it. She looked at the terminal, at the orange glow of the city to the north, at the faint line of pale light beginning at the horizon, not dawn yet, not close to it, but the first suggestion of it, the kind of light that meant the darkness had reached its outermost edge and was about to turn around. The employees, she said, the ones Sabine pushed out. I'll find them, he said. All of them. And I'll make it right. He paused. That was the agreement. You have it in writing. I know, she said. I kept my copy. He looked at her then, and what was on his face was something she had been watching approach for 2 days, without allowing herself to name it, a warmth that had been there under the professional distance for longer than she knew, and that had run out of room to stay contained. She wasn't ready to name it yet either, but she didn't look away. Go get that cut looked at, she said. I will, he said. As soon as now Malachi. She says his name the way she had never said it before. Not Mr. Vescari. Not the particular formal distance of 6 years. Just his name. Direct and clear and without the careful buffer of professional courtesy. Go. Tonight is over. He looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded. He walked toward the car where Theo was waiting with the door open and his head down, examining Henzel's own ribs with the professional resignation of a man who has confirmed they are bruised and not broken, and has filed that as a satisfactory outcome. Imani watched him go. She held the jacket around her shoulders with one hand, and the bag with the folder against her chest with the other, and she stood in the parking lot of a place that would mean nothing to anyone who drove past it tomorrow, in the dark of a night that had lasted much longer than one night, at the edge of a city that did not know and would not know what had been won and lost and altered in it. She thought about the lakeside property, the wrap-around porch, the 11 rooms, the listing that had said full of potential in the voice of someone who needed to sell, Cross Harbor House. She had not looked at the listing in 3 months. She did not know if it was still available. She did not know if it was still standing, if the price had changed, if the potential it advertised had been recognized by someone else in the time she had been standing in other people's ballrooms and carrying other people's champagne and documenting the quiet financial crimes of men who thought she was too ordinary to notice. She pulled out her phone. The listing was still there, still available. She looked at it for a long moment, the photograph of the wraparound porch in morning light, the 11 rooms, the lake spreading flat and silver behind the building. Then she put her phone away and walked to Fronte's car. She had things to do, and for the first time in a very long time, the things she had to do were going to be entirely, completely, unreservedly her own. Conrad Laurent was arrested at 11:49 that night. Imani learned this from Ferrante, in the car, heading north. He received the call, listened for 40 seconds, said 2 words understood, good, and hung up. Then he glanced at her in the rearview mirror and said, "It's done," in the tone of a man reporting the weather. She nodded. She looked out the window at Chicago sliding past in the dark, the storefronts with their grates pulled down, the orange pools of streetlight on wet asphalt, the occasional figure moving through the late hour with the particular purpose of someone who has somewhere to be, or the particular aimlessness of someone who doesn't. The city did not know. The city never knew. That was one of the things she had come to understand about living inside powerful events. They moved through ordinary life without disturbing the surface. It's the way something heavy moves through deep water. She held the bag with the folder against her chest and let the car take her somewhere she could sleep. She slept for 11 hours. When she woke, it was afternoon. The light in the room was the particular pale gold of a Chicago October afternoon, thin and clean, and without warmth, the kind of light that reminded you winter was close without making any promises. She lay in the bed for a few minutes, which was unusual for her. She was not a woman who lay in bed. She was a woman who was already making coffee before she was fully awake. But she lay there and felt the specific weight of her own body and the specific silence of a day in which nothing terrible was actively happening. And she allowed herself to feel both of those things without immediately converting them into productivity. Then she got up and made coffee and called her mother. Her mother, Eleanor Cross, was 61 years old and lived in Bronzeville in the same apartment Imani had grown up in, and she had a way of asking, "How are you?" that contained, within it, a complete and uncompromising commitment to the honest answer. Imani had spent years giving her the professionally optimistic version, fine, busy. It's going well. You know how it is. Today, standing in the small kitchen of a safe house, she didn't know the address of, drinking coffee from a mug that had a chip in the rim. She found she didn't have the energy for the professional version. She didn't tell her mother everything. She told her enough. About the ballroom, about the champagne on her face, about the bruise on her wrist. She told her about Conrad, and the folder, and the freight terminal, and Frantes saying it's done in the flat voice of a man reporting weather. Eleanor Cross was quiet through most of it. When Imani finished, her mother said, "You kept copies." "I always keep copies," Imani said. "I know," Eleanor said. "That's your father's habit. He kept receipts for everything, even gas station receipts. Your aunt used to say it was paranoia." "It wasn't paranoia," Imani said. "No," Eleanor said. "It wasn't." A pause. "Are you safe now?" "I think so," Imani said. "Yes." "Are you coming home?" She thought about that. The safe house, the mansion, the folder, the lakeside listing she had pulled up on her phone in a parking lot at midnight. "Not yet," she said. "I have things to do first." Imani. Her mother's voice settled into the register she used when she wanted to say something she had been waiting to say for longer than the current conversation. "You have been keeping other people's houses for 6 years." "I know, Mama." "When are you going to keep your own?" She looked at the chipped mug. She looked at the pale gold light through the window. "Soon," she said. "I think soon." She meant it this time. The grand jury proceedings against Conrad Laurent began 7 weeks later. Imani knew this because she read it in the Tribune, a short piece on the inside of the business section, the kind of article that described enormous events in the compressed language of legal process. Charges related to financial fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit racketeering. 2 of his lieutenants had agreed to cooperate with prosecutors. A forensic accounting firm had been engaged to trace the shell company network. She read the article in the kitchen of Cross Harbor House. She had closed on the property 6 weeks after the night at the freight terminal, using savings she had been building for 4 years, and a small business loan she had applied for twice before and been turned down for, and had applied for a third time, with documentation so precise and thorough that the loan officer had told her, with the particular bewilderment of someone unaccustomed to over-preparation, that he had never seen an application like it. The building had needed work. She had known it would need work. The listing's language full of potential was, she had understood even at the first viewing, a real estate euphemism for the third-floor bathroom is a structural concern, and the boiler is older than some of the guests who will stay here. She had walked through every room with a contractor she had found through a referral from one of the catering staff she had worked alongside for years, a woman named Patricia who knew everyone worth knowing in the trades, and she had taken notes on every surface and system and load-bearing question with the same methodical attention she had brought to 14 months of invoice documentation. She had been on site every day since closing. She had painted 3 of the 11 rooms herself. Not because she couldn't hire painters. She had hired painters for the other 8, but because there was something she needed about the physical act of it. The roller, the tray, the particular smell of fresh paint in a room that was becoming hers. The way each wall, as it was covered, stopped looking like the previous owner's choice and started looking like the beginning of something. She had chosen the colors carefully. Warm whites in the guest rooms, not cold, not clinical, but the particular warmth of a room that wanted you to sleep well in it. A deep slate blue for the dining room that caught the morning light and turned it into something almost aqueous. A soft yellow for the kitchen, which she had considered for 2 days before deciding it, because yellow kitchens made her think of her mother's kitchen in Bronzeville, and she wanted her guests to breakfast. When they came downstairs for breakfast, the way she had felt at her mother's table, like they were being fed by someone who meant it. She was reading the article about Conrad Laurent when she heard tires on the gravel drive. She set the paper down. She looked at the window over the kitchen sink, the one that faced the front drive, and the lake beyond it. A car she didn't recognize immediately, and then did. Dark city plates. Ferrante's posture in the driver's seat, visible through the windshield at 100 feet. She was already at the door before the car stopped. Malachi got out. She had not seen him in person in 6 weeks. They had spoken on the phone twice, briefly about the legal proceedings, about the employees she had asked him to locate, about the written agreement he had made and which she had her copy of, organized in a folder with the same precision as everything else. The conversations had been careful, not cold careful. The particular care of 2 people managing the distance between what they had been to each other and what they didn't yet know how to be. He looked different, not dramatically. She wasn't the kind of person who trafficked in dramatic transformations. He looked like a man who had been sleeping better or working differently. The quality of controlled exhaustion that had lived in his face for as long as she had known him was still there, but it had shifted from the exhaustion of maintaining something to the exhaustion of dismantling something, which were different weights, carried differently. But he looked at the building behind her, at the fresh paint visible through the open front door, at the sign she had installed 2 weeks ago, simple dark wood, hand-lettered, Cross Harbor House. "You moved fast," he said. "I've been planning it for a long time," she said. He nodded. He had his hands in his jacket pockets. He looked like a man who had driven 2 hours from Chicago with something to say, and was now assessing whether the setting was right for saying it. "Come in," she said. "I'll make coffee." They sat at the kitchen table, the one she had bought secondhand, an estate from an estate sale. 3 towns over, a solid oak table that had been in someone else's family for 40 years, and that she intended to be in hers for as long. She made coffee in the press pot she had brought from her own kitchen supplies, and she set it on the table with 2 mugs, and she sat across from him the way she had sat across from him, in the study of the mansion, straight-backed, present, not hiding. He wrapped both hands around the mug. "I found all of them," he said. "The employees, Daniel, the others." She had known he would. She had the written agreement. She had also known, beyond the agreement, that he would find them, because the particular kind of man who kneels on a marble floor in front of 200 people to pick up a broken champagne flute was the particular kind of man who followed through. "How are they?" she said. "Daniel is in Guadalajara," he said. "The story turned out to be partly true. He does have family there. He found work at a hotel. He's doing well enough." He paused. "I sent restitution, severance he should have received, references that accurately reflect his work." Another pause. He sent a message back. 2 words. "What words?" "About time," Malachi said. She almost smiled. "Good for Daniel. The others are similar. Each of them received what I owed them. 3 of them have already moved on to better positions. One of them," he stopped. A brief thing moved through his face. "One of them sent back the money. Said she didn't want it." "Which one?" "Her name was Maria Ortega. She worked in the West Wing." "You probably knew her," Imani thought. "She made the best tamales I've ever had," she said. "She made them at Christmas for the whole staff. Every year." "She sent back the money," Malachi said, with a note that said she'd rather I donated it, somewhere that needed it more than she did. He looked at the table. She also said. He stopped again, and she could see him deciding whether to say the next part. She also said she forgave me for not seeing what was happening in my own house. He was quiet for a moment. "I didn't ask for that. I wasn't expecting it." Imani looked at him. at the way he was holding the mug tight, the knuckles slightly pale. The way people held things when they were trying to contain something larger than the object. People are unexpectedly generous sometimes, she said, with the people who earn it. He looked up at her. You earned it, she said, by doing the work, not by intending to. He set the mug down. He looked at the kitchen, at the yellow walls, the press pot, the stack of contractor invoice she hadn't filed yet, the window with the lake visible beyond the gravel drive. He looked at it the way people look at things that represent something to them that the thing itself doesn't know. What happened to Griggs? She said. He cooperated with the federal investigation, Malachi said, fully, in exchange for a reduced charge. He'll lose his credentials. He won't work in financial services again. He paused. He was not a bad man, I think. He was a man who made a choice a long time ago and then spent years making smaller choices to protect the first one. That's how it usually works, she said. Yes. And Riele? Malachi's jaw moved slightly. The name still landed differently than the others she could see it, the particular adjustment his face made around it. Riel was picked up in Milwaukee 3 weeks ago, he said. He had a new identity prepared. It wasn't quite prepared enough. A pause. He's cooperating too. Not out of conscience. Out of calculation. He was always better at calculation than conscience. Will he testify against Conrad? He already has, Malachi said. His testimony, combined with the folder, is why the charges are as extensive as they are. He looked at her steadily. Your documentation is the thread that holds all of it together. The prosecutors told me, and they told me to pass this on, that without the chain of reference numbers and the vendor address records, they could have built a case, but it would have taken 2 more years, and Conrad's attorneys would have had enough time to relocate assets. And, don't, she said. He stopped. Don't make it about what I did, she said. I kept copies of invoices. I looked up some addresses on my lunch break. That's not heroism. That's just, she shook her head. That's just how I work. I know, he said, but it mattered. A lot of ordinary things matter, she said. That's the point. He was quiet for a moment, and the kitchen was quiet, and outside the lake was doing what the lake did, moving. Without urgency, gray-blue in the afternoon light, going nowhere and arriving continuously. Sabini said. She waited. She's in Paris, he said. She left before the arrest. I don't know if she was warned or if she read the situation herself. I think she's going to be all right. In the financial sense. Her mother's family has money that was never connected to Conrad's operations. He paused. I don't have anything more charitable to say about her than that. You don't need to be charitable, Imani said. You just need to be honest. Then honestly, I think she was partly a weapon her father built, and partly a person who chose to be sharp because she had seen how much damage sharp things could do, and decided she would rather be the damage than receive it. He picked up the mug again. That doesn't excuse what she did to you. To any of you. But I've been trying to understand it, and that's the closest I've gotten. Imani thought about Sabine's face in the ballroom. The jealousy, the contempt, the particular brightness of a woman performing cruelty in front of an audience. She thought about Conrad at the breakfast table of a family that had presumably seemed normal from the inside. She thought about the very long shadow a certain kind of father could cast. She should have found a different way to be sharp. Imani said finally. Yes, Malachi said. She should have. They finished their coffee. The afternoon light shifted, going from thin gold to the flat, even gray that came before sunset in October. Imani cleared the mugs and washed them at the sink, which was something she did automatically in any kitchen that belonged to her, and she watched the lake through the window while her hands moved in the warm water. She heard Malachi stand behind her. She heard him cross to the window beside the back door, the one that looked toward the water, and she heard him stop there. I'm dissolving the remaining operations, he said. The last of the ones that weren't already legitimate. It's taking longer than I wanted. The lawyers are involved, which means it takes longer than anyone wants. He paused. By spring, I think. Everything that remains will be legal and above ground and genuinely boring. Good, she said. The logistics company is actually growing, he said, and there was something in his voice that was almost surprise. Without the complexity of the other operations, it turns out there's significant demand for a freight and logistics firm that simply does what it says it will do, when it says it will do it, without the complications that tend to accompany businesses like the one I used to run. She turned off the tap. She dried her hands. Reliability, she said. It's underrated, apparently. She heard the almost humor in it. I've been told by 3 different clients in the past month that they chose us specifically because we have a reputation for keeping our commitments. He paused. That is a different reputation than the one I had. Do you prefer it? She asked. A long pause. She could hear him thinking about it honestly, rather than reaching for the easy answer. Yes, he said. I didn't expect to prefer it as much as I do. But yes. She turned from the sink. He was standing at the window, with his back to her, looking at the lake. His jacket was on, his hands at his sides. He had the posture of a man who has said most of what he came to say and is now standing in the space between what has been said and what has not yet been. She knew that space. She had been standing in it herself for 6 weeks. Malachi, she said. He turned. Why did you really come today, she said. Not the employees, you could have handled that by phone. Not the legal update Ferrante could have called. She looked at him directly, the way she had learned to look at things that needed to be seen clearly. Why did you drive 2 hours? He looked at her for a long moment. Because I wanted to see what you built, he said. And because he stopped. Tried again. Because I have spent the last 6 weeks building something I should have built a long time ago, and I wanted to see what that looked like when someone else did it. When someone did it right, he paused. And because, say the rest, she said. Because I miss talking to you, he said. Not the professional version of it. Not the version where you're managing my household, and I'm being careful about the appropriate boundaries of that. Just, he moved his hand slightly, a small, uncharacteristic gesture of someone reaching for language that isn't doing what they need it to do. Just talking. Like in the kitchen. Like when you told me you wanted it in writing, and I understood that was not about the writing. She looked at him. She felt the thing she had been not feeling for 6 weeks move through her chest with the particular insistence of something that has been managed very carefully for a long time and has finally run out of patience with being managed. I'm not going to be your housekeeper again, she said, clearly, without apology. I know, he said. I'm not going to be anyone's anything, she said, except my own. I need that to be the foundation. Whatever else exists has to be built on top of that, not instead of it. I know that too, he said. I would not ask you to be anything other than what you are. She looked at him. At the cut above his eyebrow that had healed to a thin line. At his hands still at his sides. At the specific quality of a man standing very still because he is waiting for something he is not certain he has earned and knows better than to try to take it. The inn opens in 3 months, she said. I have 11 rooms and a boiler that has been professionally assessed and a 3rd-floor bathroom that is no longer a structural concern. She paused. I'm going to be very busy. I imagine so, he said. I don't have a lot of room in a very busy life, she said, for something that isn't real. I'm not offering you something that isn't real, he said. She held his gaze. I know, she said finally. He breathed. It was not a declaration. It was not a beginning in any of the ways. Beginnings are usually staged, no music, no sweep of feeling that resolved cleanly into a single uncomplicated emotion. It was 2 people standing in a yellow kitchen by a lake in October, both of them tired in the particular way of people who have been through something large and come out the other side changed by it, acknowledging carefully, with the specific caution of people who understand what is at stake, that whatever came next was worth the caution. She walked to the back door and opened it. The air off the lake was cold and clean and smelled of water and the distant suggestion of snow. Come see the porch, she said. I put in new boards on the east side. The original ones were warped. He came to beside her in the doorway. Together they looked out at the wraparound porch, the new boards she had mentioned, paler than the old ones, not yet weathered to match. The way new things always stood out against the existing grain until time brought them level. The lake beyond the property line was moving in the October wind, surface textured and gray-blue, and going to the horizon without interruption. It's good work, he said. It is, she said, not modestly, not with performance, just agreeing with a fact. They stood there for a while. The weeks after that, moved with the particular pace of construction, not fast, never as fast as you wanted, but forward, which was the thing that mattered. The inn opened on a Saturday in mid-January, earlier than Imani had originally planned, and later than her most optimistic schedule had suggested, which put it squarely in the range of realistic. She had 9 rooms occupied on opening weekend. By March, she had a waiting list for spring. Rosa, who had left the Vescari mansion 2 weeks after the arrest, and spent a month unsure of what came next, came to work at Cross Harbor House in February. She managed the front desk with an attention to detail that Imani recognized the same instinct that had kept her cataloging small wrongs in a house where speaking up had felt like standing on a ledge. Here it expressed itself differently, in the way she remembered every returning guest's preferences, the way she tracked maintenance requests before they became problems, the way she ran the reservation system with a precision that made the whole machine feel effortless to everyone who wasn't paying close attention. Imani paid close attention.
"You should finish your hospitality certificate,"
she said to Rosa, one morning in early March, over the kind of direct conversation that Imani had always preferred and that Rosa was learning to prefer too. Rosa looked at her. "I have a job." "You have a job in potential," Imani said. "Those aren't mutually exclusive. I'll adjust your schedule around classes. That's not charity. It's an investment in someone I plan to keep." Rosa was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You sound like a boss." "I am a boss," Imani said. Rosa smiled. "Yeah," she said. "You are." Malachi drove out from the city on alternating weekends through February and March. He never stayed at the inn. There was a small motel 3 miles down the road that he used, which was his own decision, and which Imani did not comment on, because she understood it as the decision of a man who understood that the boundaries she had named were real, and who was going to respect them without being asked to do so twice. He brought things sometimes. Not gifts, he was careful about that, she noticed, careful not to arrive with anything that felt like a bid for something. A book he had read and thought she might find useful. A very good thermos of coffee on the Sunday morning. He arrived to help carry lumber for the dock renovation. Himself, mostly that was what he brought, and she was finding sufficient. The conversations they had in those months were the conversations she had told him she missed. Not professional, not careful. The kind of conversations that developed their own grammar over time, references that built on previous references, jokes that required 3 weeks of shared context to land, the particular ease that only came from a combination of genuine respect and genuine time. She did not rush it. She did not slow it down artificially either. It moved at the speed it moved. On a Saturday morning in late April, the lake was beginning to lose its winter hardness, the light coming back with the particular generosity of a season that had been withheld. Imani was on the east porch with her coffee when Malachi pulled into the drive. He parked. He got out. He stood beside the car for a moment, looking at the building the way he had on his first visit, the sign, the fresh paint, the new dock boards visible at the water's edge. She watched him from the porch. He came up the steps and sat in the chair beside her without being invited, which was a recent development, the shift from waiting to be asked to simply taking the chair that was by now understood to be his when he was there. She had noticed the shift and had not mentioned it because some things were better marked in silence. He had a coffee thermos. He poured his own and set the thermos on the table between them. They looked at the lake. "I finalized the last dissolution yesterday," he said. "The final entity that needed to be wound down." He looked at the water. "It's done." "How does that feel?" she said. He thought about it, the way he thought about things she asked him honestly, without rushing to the acceptable answer. "Like putting down something very heavy," he said finally, "and then realizing you've been compensating for the weight so long that you don't immediately know how to stand up straight without it." "You'll figure it out," she said. "I know," he said. "I'm working on it." The lake moved. A bird she didn't know the name of landed on this new dock boards, walked 3 steps with the alert, precise movement of a creature conducting an inspection, and flew away satisfied. "I didn't save you," Malachi said, that night in the ballroom. "I want to say that clearly, since I've been thinking about how to say it for several months." She looked at him. "I knelt down and asked if you were hurt," he said. "And I sent Sabine home. It was the right thing to do, and it was also the thing I should have done months before, and if I had been paying attention to my own house the way I should have been, it would never have gotten to that night." He held his coffee mug in both hands. "You saved me. From a marriage that was a mechanism for my own destruction. From a decade of betrayal that would have taken everything. He paused. From continuing to be the man the criminal world expected me to remain, because you held evidence that forced the resolution I had been delaying." He looked at her. "I've needed to say that for a long time." Imani looked at him for a moment. "I kept copies of invoices," she said, "because it's my habit. I didn't know what I was saving you from. I didn't know I was saving anyone. That's the part that matters, he said. You were just being exactly who you are. And who you are is what made the difference. She looked back at the lake. We saved each other, she said. From different things and in different ways and mostly by accident. That seems like an honest accounting. He looked at her. Something in his face settled the specific quality of a man who has been carrying a framing of events that didn't quite fit, who has just been offered one that does. Yeah, he said, that's honest. The morning spread across the water without hurry. The inn was quiet behind them. It was early, before breakfast service. The guests still in their rooms or just beginning to move. In an hour, she would be in the kitchen, and there would be 11 people at the table she had chosen for its solidity and its history, and they would be fed by someone who meant it. She was going to be busy all day. She sat with her coffee in the pale April light and felt the specific, unperformable quality of a life that was entirely her own, the weight of it, the warmth of it, the particular satisfaction of a dream that had been named in secret and built in full view, and that now stood at her back in the form of 11 rooms and a wraparound porch and new boards on the dock and a sign. That said exactly what she had decided to call it. Malachi sat beside her, not ahead of her. They watched the lake, and Imani crossed the woman who had been dismissed as invisible in a ballroom 9 months ago, who had stood with champagne on her face in front of 200 people and had not broken, who had spent 14 months keeping copies of that didn't add up and had, in doing so, accidentally documented the destruction of an empire. Imani Cross sat on the porch of her own inn in the morning light and let herself feel, without qualifying it or containing it or converting it into something more manageable, the full and undecorated weight of having built something that belonged entirely to her. It was not a perfect life. Her mother's MS had progressed slightly over the winter, and there were weeks coming that would be harder than these. The boiler, despite its professional assessment, had required emergency attention twice in February. She had made 3 decisions in the renovation that she would make differently if she could go back, and she was the kind of person who noticed that. She was also the kind of person who understood that imperfect and hers were not contradictions. They were, in fact, the same thing. She finished her coffee. She went inside to start breakfast. And the morning came fully over the lake, the light going from pale to gold to the particular clear brightness of a day that intended to be good, and Cross Harbor House received it the way it received everything, with its doors open, its rooms ready, and the woman who built it already moving through the work of the life she had chosen, steady and unhurried, and entirely, irreversibly her own.